Hey everybody, welcome back. I know we took off last Monday, so this is our first week back to the call in a little while. Mike's actually on vacation. He went on vacation last week. He'll be back Wednesday, so if you need anything, everybody else is still here, so feel free to give us a call. Let's see if I can get this going here. Today's pointer, it's not anything particularly new, so I just want to kind of maybe give you a different perspective on something that we talk about a lot. So we talk on this call about how all of the market indicators point to a major correction sometime down the road. And we say that while we don't know if the correction will come a day from now or a week from now or a month from now or even a year from now, the market's like a garage that's kind of filled with old gas cans and paint cans and propane tanks and old space heaters or a turkey fryer with last year's grease. And no, it's not on fire now, but it's super combustible and dangerous and could go at any time. And so I guess the new perspective that I kind of want to leave you with is the idea that the markets could tank at any second. That's not my opinion, and that's not Mike's opinion, or even the opinions of academics like Nobel Prize winners who do nothing but study the market. I mean, even people like that have come out and said, hey, the market's super combustible right now. But those aren't our opinions. The perspective that I kind of want to leave you with today is that's actually scientifically verifiable fact. So a book was written long ago, back in 2006. I'm not even sure it's still in print. It was called Ubiquity, Why Catastrophes Happen. And it was written by a guy by the name of Mark Buchanan. Now, Mark Buchanan, he's not a scientist. He's not a researcher, he's a writer. So think of him as somebody like Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell's not a scientist or a researcher either. He just takes the science and the research that's out there and he kind of aggregates it and he writes it in a way that's kind of in layman's terms, that's relatable. Now, this isn't a book about the stock market per se, but there is a section that talks about the stock market. It's actually a book about something called critical state theory, or sometimes you'll hear it called critical mass theory. And that's what scientists call it. Non-scientists sometimes call it chaos theory. So you might have heard of it talked about all those different ways. So just think about how many lives could be saved if we could predict when and where the next earthquake would take place, or if we could predict when and where the next tornado would touch down. And so the question becomes, because we know a lot about earthquakes and we know a lot about weather and we know a lot about tornadoes. So the question is, why, when we know so much about earthquakes and tornadoes, are we still so far away from being able to make predictions like that? I mean, we know a lot about earthquakes, but we can't tell you when the next one will happen or where. Why is that? Well, to better understand critical mass theory, a group of scientists studied sand piles. And so we've all probably played in a sandbox at some point in our life and built sand piles. And so we know that you can build a sand pile only so high before it comes crashing back down. And so what these scientists were trying to understand is what leads to a sand pile avalanche? And is there an average size of a sand pile avalanche? And could you, with enough information, predict which grain of sand causes an avalanche? So to kind of work with the kind of precision they needed, they didn't actually build real sand piles. Instead, what they did is they wrote a computer program that dropped a virtual grain of sand on a virtual pile, one at a time, so that they could study it. So here's from the book, it says, to find out why, here's what they found when they studied these sand piles. What they found is, you know what, even with the computer, there is no real average size of a sand pile avalanche. And we're actually kind of confused why sometimes it's a small avalanche and sometimes it's a big avalanche and sometimes it's something in between. I mean, we're actually, by doing this experiment, raising more questions than we're answering. So they came up with another idea. And here's what they decided to do. To find out why such unpredictability would show up in their sandpile game, Bach and colleagues, those are the scientists, next played a trick with their computer. Imagine peering down on the pile from above and coloring it in according to its steepness. So where it's relatively flat and stable, color it green. Where steep and in avalanche terms ready to go, color it red. So what do you see? They found out at the outset the pile looked mostly green. But as the pile grew, the green became infiltrated with ever more red. With more grains of sand, the scattering of red danger spots grew until a dense skeleton of instability ran through the pile. Here then was a clue to its peculiar behavior. A grain falling on a red spot can, by domino-like action, cause sliding at nearby red spots. If the red network was sparse and all trouble spots were well isolated from the other, then a single grain could only have limited repercussions. But when the red spots come to riddle the pile, the consequences of the next grain become fiendishly unpredictable. It might trigger only a few rumblings, or it might instead set off a cataclysmic chain reaction involving millions. The sand pile seemed to have configured itself into a hypersensitive and peculiarly unstable condition in which the next falling grain could trigger a response of any size whatsoever. So these sand piles naturally form where there's no problem. It's mostly green at the beginning. It's mostly stable. But as we add conditions of instability, we end up with these red spots or these red fingers that run through the sand pile. And that's why we can't predict the next earthquake or the next tornado or the next market crash, because the next grain of sand, which looks just like every other grain of sand, could trigger an avalanche. And it might be a small avalanche depending on where it lands and how it lands, or it could be a big avalanche if the pile is riddled with red. Now here's what the market sand pile looks like. It's riddled with red. And here's the real problem. Have you ever heard people say things like this? It's a new reality. It's a new market. We're living in a new world. And the Fed, for example, has kept interest rates so low for so long that the market has already priced in the possibility that the Fed will raise rates at their next meeting. Or they'll say, the market has already priced in a COVID slowdown in the economy. Or the market has already priced in Russian cyber attacks on our meatpacking plants or our utility companies or our other infrastructure. And here's the real problem. All of that can be true. We could have already taken all of that into account. But all those things are just another grain of sand that falls on the pile, no different than any of the grains of sand that came before them. But guess what? If the science is right, then even though they're just like any other grain of sand that came before it, they can still cause an avalanche. And if they fall in the wrong spot on an ever-growing pile, it's going to be catastrophic. And then we'll all be scrambling to figure out why that an event, no different than other events, it's not like the cyber attack had never happened before. Why would this one have caused such a market crash? It's not like the Fed never raised rates before. Why would this time cause a market crash? It's not like COVID slowing down the economy is a surprise. Why would that news coming out right now, or that labor report, or that this or that, cause this catastrophe? And we'll all be scratching our heads, but it'll be too late. Because the real reason is that it's just another grain of sand that fell in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the market was just ripe for a catastrophe. I mean, there are many, so the author kind of ends the introduction to the book by saying this: there are many subtleties and twists in the story, but the basic message, roughly speaking, is simple. The peculiar and exceptionally unstable organization of the critical state does indeed seem to be ubiquitous in the world, means it's widespread. Researchers in the past few years have found its mathematical fingerprints in the workings of all of the upheavals I've mentioned so far: earthquakes, eco disasters, market crashes, as well as in the spreading of epidemics, the flaring of traffic jams, the patterns by which instructions trickle down from managers to workers in the office, and in many other things. At the heart of our story then lies the discovery that networks of things of all kinds, atoms, molecules, species, people, and even ideas, have a marked tendency to organize themselves along similar lines. On the basis of this insight, scientists are finally beginning to fathom what lies behind tumultuous events of all sorts, and to see patterns at work where they have never seen them before. So again, this is a very dangerous and unpredictable time for the market. And what scientists think is the next grain of sand could in fact be the thing that causes the catastrophe. So when we say, hey, it's going to go, we just don't know when, that's not anyone's opinion. That's what scientists believe is actual fact. Again, a shout out to Mark Buchanan for making the science of it all easily relatable. Again, this book isn't really about the market. It's about chaos theory or critical state theory, but it's a good book. I read it years and years ago. I'm not even sure it's in print. You could probably find it if you were interested, but that's kind of what that's all about. So be aware of that. The next thing we're going to talk about is really the main topic of today. I had a hard time really coming up with a topic. And so there were actually 3 topics that I considered. So I'm going to talk about just briefly the 2 topics I didn't talk about. I don't normally do that. I don't normally tell you guys what I'm not going to talk about or what I thought I might talk about. But I will today, and we'll kind of circle back and learn why. So of the 3 topics that I considered, the first one that I eliminated was converting Roth or IRA money to Roths. That's something that people do, and as you get towards the end of the year, it's probably something that you would talk to clients more about, but I kind of eliminated that as a topic. My second choice was talking about tax saving strategies for retirees. And while I decided not to talk about these things, when I started to put together the slides for today's topic, I realized that in a way, the point I want to make today pertains just as much to these 2 topics as it does to what we're ultimately going to talk about. So what is today's topic? Well, to kind of introduce today's topic, I want to kind of talk first about something called first principles thinking. First principles thinking is a way to approach a problem when you're stuck trying to think of a solution to that problem. So you start with what you know, and you kind of work backward from that to the most fundamental truths about a thing. So I think that sounds kind of intuitive, but most people don't do that. So to give you an example, the person who's probably most famous for that is first principles thinking and kind of really boiling things down to their most fundamental truths is Elon Musk. So that's how he came up with the idea for Tesla. So this is a quote from him. He's saying first principles is a physics way of looking at the world. You boil things down to the most fundamental truths and then reason up from there. For example, people may say battery packs are really expensive and that's the way they'll always be. But no, that's pretty dumb. If you apply that reasoning to anything new, you wouldn't ever be able to get to that new thing. His idea was to start a company that would make electric cars accessible to the masses. And so he realized that, you know what the real stumbling block is? The only reason it hasn't happened so far, if you really work backward, it's because batteries are so expensive. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make an inexpensive battery. That's what I'm going to pour my resources and my time and my energy and my thought into. How can I make a cheap battery? Now he's still working on that. Sort of, he started Tesla as kind of a side gig, thinking, you know what, with whatever progress I'll make, I'll just introduce an electric sports car. It'll be really expensive because, you know, they're still not that cheap, but the money that I make from selling expensive electric sports cars will fund my research into making less expensive cars. And so now he's kind of come out with a mid-level S model that's not as expensive. The batteries are better, and the money he makes from that, his goal is to take that money and start doing what he set out to do, make electric batteries cheap so he can put them in cars that everybody can afford to drive. Here's probably a better example of his first principles thinking. One of his visions was, and it still is, I assume, to send a manned space mission to Mars. So he started to think to himself, well, what would it take if I wanted to put a man on Mars? And he got some people together and they said, well, first of all, you'd have to have, you know, a capsule, and you'd have to have rockets. He said, okay, capsule technology, because it's a long ride. I mean, are we there? And they said, yeah, we're pretty much there. Okay, rocket technology, are we there? Yeah, I would say we're mostly there. The problem with the rocket technology is Mars is a long ways away, so you couldn't get there with one rocket. You'd probably have to, I don't know, 10? Okay, so you'd have to have something capable of carrying 10 rockets. Yeah, but keep in mind, Mr. Musk, rockets are really expensive. Like how expensive? Like $65 million each. $65 million each? Why? Well, you got to remember, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of parts. Like what? Like what's the fuel? Well, it's mostly hydrogen. Well, the last time I looked, hydrogen wasn't expensive. Well, okay, but it's not just hydrogen. You can't just, you have to have it contained in something. And that costs money. So what's a container? Well, it's a metal cylinder. What kind of metal? Oh, kind of these carbon aluminum alloys. Carbon and aluminum, that's not that expensive, not $65 million expensive. Well, it's not just the parts. Granted, the parts might only be $1 million worth of that $65 million rocket. You also have to have the people to build it. You have to have engineers, and you have to have literally rocket scientists. Well, how much does a rocket scientist cost? If I wanted to employ a rocket scientist, what would I have to pay him? Well, rocket scientists make like $150,000 a year, but I'm assuming that you want the very best rocket scientists you could get. And those people, you're probably going to have to pay them more, like $200,000 a year. And you're going to need more than one. Okay, so I'm going to need engineers and rocket scientists, but I'm just sitting here doing the napkin math, and I'm saying I probably got another $3 million in rocket scientists and engineer salaries here. So we're up to $4 million. I still don't understand why this thing costs $65 million. Well, you can't just have all that stuff in the middle of the desert. You'd have to build a facility, a place where you could put all those things together, where people could go and park their cars and go to work and have lunch and build the thing. Okay, so what would a facility cost? Oh, geez. We could be talking $35, $40 million for something like that. Okay, so let me get this right. $40 million for a facility, $1 million for parts, and another, say, $4 million in wages. So my math says that we're up to about $45 million for a $65 million rocket. And you're telling me I need 10 of them. And the first one's going to cost me $45 million because I'm going to have to build the facility. But every one after that is going to cost me more like $4 or $5 million for parts and payroll. Well, I guess if you put it like that, yeah. Well, you know what? I still intend to put a man on Mars, but between now and then, guess what I'm going to do? If there's with those kinds of margins, I'm starting a rocket company. I'm going to build rocket engines. And so he started a company called SpaceX. And SpaceX is a wildly successful, wildly profitable company that sells rockets to businesses and governments to launch things like satellites. So he didn't just accept the fact that something costs $65 million. He worked backwards and wanted to know why, where is that cost coming from? And he realized, you know what? You could actually build a decent rocket for 10, 15 million dollars, even if you amortize the cost of the facility into each and every rocket. And if you can sell them for $65 million, which I'll bank because I won't sell them for $65 million. I'll give people a deal and sell them for $45 million and still make out like a bandit. And so that's the benefit of first principles thinking. So here's the big question. What does that have to do with us? I mean, what's our first principle? What's the thing that's most basic to our success in this business? So I'm not very good at looking at the questions or the chat. So let's just see if we can get some answers in the questions or the chat box. What do you think is most fundamental? What's the one thing that we have to be good at to be successful in this business? What'd you guess? What are some guesses? So let's see if we can get some answers. I don't know. Different. We have to be different. We have to be simple. That would help. I'm getting that. What are some other things? Yeah, we have to be different, but you know, we can't be too different. So let me ask you this: an accountant who's really different, does he get a lot of clients? Do you want to go to the most different accountant in town? The most imaginative accountant in town? I mean, some people do, but guess what most people think? I don't want to go to an imaginative accountant. I don't want to get in any trouble. I just want to file my taxes. Yeah, I think simple is kind of hitting close to home. Persistent. Somebody just got it. Richard just got it. You have to be good at presenting. Because the reality is we're all kind of talking about the same things. We're all talking about converting IRA money to Roth money. We're all talking about saving money and taxes in retirement. We're all talking about getting more income. We're all talking about growing your money in a more efficient way or keeping your money safe. We're all talking about those things. What you have to be is good at presenting. That's probably our first principle. That's really what all salespeople get paid to do, is present. So I think most of you have probably heard at one time or another of Simon Sinek. He was an author who's probably most known for a TED Talk that he did years ago called The Power of Why. So this is just showing you that, yeah, you have to take all the information, all the knowledge, you have to funnel it into your brain and make it into something that's relatable and presentable and easy for clients to understand. So Simon Sinek, he's that author that I talked about, who's probably most known for the TED Talk that he did years ago called The Power of Why. And again, I think most of you have probably seen it. And if you haven't, you can just Google Simon Sinek TED Talk and it'll pop right up. That's the thing that he's most popular for. But what his point was is that you could really talk about three things. You could talk about what, which is what you do, which is save people money and taxes or help them convert their IRA to Roth. But what they're really interested in, if you get down to the next level, is how do you do that? What's unique about you and why? Why do you do that and why do you do it that way? Those are the things that you really have to be able to articulate if you want to succeed. Because everybody talks about what. It's only the people who can articulate the how and the why that separate themselves and differentiate themselves from everybody else that's out there talking about Roth conversions or saving money in taxes. And so this morning, I want to spend a little time talking about the how and why behind something that we talk about a lot, and hopefully it'll make us better, more convincing, and more successful presenters of this idea. So here's the idea. The idea is that you can increase the income generated by your current investments by 25% with no additional risk by using a formula developed at the University of San Francisco School of Business. So we're talking about ways that we can maximize our retirement income. And we talk how we can use that phrase, that unique selling proposition on our business cards, or we could use it as an elevator speech, or we can use it as a seminar. It's there as a a seminar as something that you can advertise to. You can use it as any kind of a lead magnet, but you have to be good at presenting it. Now, we start the presentation of this idea way back in the agreement meeting when we go through the goals section. I mean, number 2 is point blank dedicated to just that. I want to make sure my money lasts throughout my lifetime. And we actually have a script that fleshes that out to get them to say, yeah, and that's not just pretty important to me, that's really important to me. That's a 5. That's something I definitely want to know how to do. So our presentation starts with a seminar, or it starts with some other way that we're using that unique selling proposition as a lead magnet. And one of the things we talk to them right out of the gate, right in the goals section there, is how you is to remind them that that's an important thing, to get them to tell you that, yes, that's very important to us. And we even take a step further when we get into the 21-point checklist. Now, if you looked at the areas of concern on the 21-point checklist, you're not going to see anything on there that talks about income. But if you've been doing this a while, you know that at the end of this, we always say, so here's how a 21-point checklist usually ends. It ends with us talking about the last thing on the list there, which is long-term care protection. What we generally say about long-term care protection, because we're not really going to delve into it right there, because maybe they have it, maybe they don't. I know better than to make that the crux or the hinge. I don't want everything hinging on that. In fact, in the 21-point checklist, I don't want anything hinging on any of these things. What I want it hinging on is, did you know about these things, or were these things kept from you? Did you know about these first 7 things? No. Why not? Well, he doesn't do those things. He didn't tell us about them because he doesn't do them. Well, what about those things in the middle? No, he didn't tell us about those, probably because they're not high on his list of priorities. He doesn't care about them. So the things at the top, he didn't tell us because he doesn't know about them. The things in the middle, he didn't tell us because he doesn't care about them. Sure, these things at the bottom, though, he should have told us. He hid those from us on purpose. He was afraid if we saw that, we would leave him, and he just wants to keep us as clients so he can make money. That's what the 21-point checklist hinges on. So when I get to long-term care, that's kind of a throwaway, and I'll say something like this. I'll say the next thing we need to talk about is your long-term care protection. Now, imagine that I'm talking to somebody who doesn't have long-term care. I'm still not, that would be the most ideal for me, but I'm still not going to talk about it. I'm going to say, hey, here's the thing about long-term care. That's probably one of the most difficult and most time-consuming things that we could talk about, because of all the different situations that you could encounter and all the different kinds of coverages and all the variables that go into that. So we've spent a lot of time. We've spent probably the last hour and 45 minutes, almost 2 hours, talking about all these other things. And so my philosophy is generally this. Let's just kind of, we found some things that we want to take care of. I mean, would you agree that we found some things that we want to take care of? Oh yeah, we definitely found some things we want to take care of. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take care of those easy things first? Because some of them are easier. Then we'll move to the things that are a little less easy, and we'll end with the things that are the most difficult. But because long-term care is probably the most difficult, would it be okay if we save that for last? Yeah, that would be okay. We could save that for last. You're right. It's been a long time. We actually have to get going here pretty quick. Okay, perfect. Now, one thing we didn't talk about today is income. Now, just breaking role play for a second. I'm going to assume this is somebody who's not taking income from their portfolio. If they're taking income from their portfolio, that's an easy conversation. I just say, now you're taking income from your portfolio. Do you want to keep taking the same amount of income from your portfolio? And of course, what's everybody going to say? Yeah, we want to at least be able to continue to do that. So that's why it's an easy conversation. But let's say they're not taking income. I say, now you're not taking income from any of your investments right now, but is there the chance that maybe someday in the future you might take income from this account in the future? And it's because of the way I phrase it. Is there a chance that maybe someday you might possibly take income from this in the future? Everybody says, well, yeah, maybe someday I might possibly. Sure. And then I ask them, how much money, if you were to take income, how much money would you want to take from this portfolio? Well, because they're not taking income now and they're just saying that, yeah, maybe someday I might, they'll predictably say, well, I haven't really thought about that. I don't know. So that's where I do some math in my head. I know they have a $400,000 portfolio. How do I know that? I've seen their statements. I know how much money they have. That's a no-brainer. They have $400,000. I know that I can get 5% from the sale. Now, we'll talk about how I know that here in just a second, but for the time being, I'm going to say, well, what's 5% of 400,000? That's easy math. That's $20,000 per year. Well, how much is that per month? What's 20,000 divided by 12? Geez, that's not so easy math. I'm not sure. All I know is it's something less than 2,000. I'm going to guess it's between 1,500 and 2,000. I'd need a calculator to do that, and I don't have a calculator here. That's the conversation that's going on in my head. So I'm going to say, well, I'm pretty sure I could at least get them 1,500, but they don't know how much they need. So I'm going to negotiate a number. I'm going to start low, and I'm going to say, well, if I could get you an extra $500 a month, would that be helpful? And they're going to say, well, sure. I mean, it would be helpful. I can't imagine it wouldn't be helpful. Well, what if I could get you $1,000 a month? Would that be good? Well, yeah, I mean, that would be great. I mean, we're not using it now, so yeah, $1,000 would be great. Well, how about if I could get you, say, $1,500 a month? Well, wow. I mean, yeah, if you could get us $1,500 a month, I mean, I don't even know that we would know what to do with that money. Great. So if I could show you a plan, this is how I end the meeting. If I could show you a plan, if I could come back with something that had your money halfway in growth and 50% in safety, and I'm using the numbers that we agreed on in the asset weighting, and they may have said, well, we want 60% in growth. But if I could come back with a plan that had 60% in growth and 40% safe and could get you around $1,500 a month, is that the kind of thing that you'd be looking for? Well, yeah, that's exactly what we would be looking for. Notice that everything I'm doing, from the agreement meeting to the 21-point check, this income conversation at the 21-point checklist, is to funnel them to a sale plan. I know where I'm going. That's what makes the conversation possible. So you have to be experts on where we're going, and then you have to be good at those conversations. That's the first principle. You have to be good at having conversations with people. That's what you get paid to do. Talk to people. And intuitively, we kind of know that. I mean, you don't get paid to do market research. You don't get paid to read the Wall Street Journal. You don't get paid to figure out what ETFs have done the best over the past 12 months. You get paid to talk to people who come in to see you and convince them that you know more and can help them more because you're more transparent than their guy. But now I'm going to demonstrate a depth of knowledge, of expertise when it comes to income. And I started that at the agreement meeting. I continued it at the end of the 21-point checklist meeting. And now I'm going to just blow the doors off with this sale presentation. The sale plan is our solution for how you maximize your retirement income so that you can keep your lifestyle in retirement no matter what life throws at you. So as advisors, it's important that we understand the how and the why of the sale plan so that we can be more effective when we present it. Because remember, what you do, getting people more income, a lot of people say that. That doesn't make you special. How you do it and why you do it that way is what makes you different and what makes people want to work with you as opposed to anybody else. So this is a deep dive. This call is a deep dive into the idea of time segmentation, which is what the sale plan is, dividing money into time buckets to use in 5-year increments. That time segmentation is the optimal way to maximize your retirement income. Now, we claim that you can get 25% more income in retirement using the sales strategy. So between you and me as advisors, how do we come up with that 25% increase? And how does just dividing your money in buckets and putting some of it in annuities, how does it increase the amount of income that you can take? How does that happen? How is it that we're not just throwing out a number and just kind of reverse engineering and making it work? Why does that work? Well, consider somebody with a $500,000 portfolio. Now, if they were to go to anybody else and say, you know, I've got this $500,000 and I want to make sure that I can take money from it and not run out, how much can I take and not run out? Well, everybody's going to tell them 4%, because that's all the math that's been done. And we can talk about that math another time, but that is generally what's considered to be valid. And so 4% of 500,000, that's $20,000 per year. And if we were to divide that into 12 months, that's 1,600, and let's just call it $67 per month. So that's what they could take. Now, if I was going to increase that 4% by 25%, by a quarter, well, we'd be talking about a 5% drawdown. And 5% of 25,000 is 5% of 500,000 is $25,000 per year. By the way, that's also that 25% increase from $20,000 per year, or $2,083 per month, which, by the way, is a 25% increase from the $1,667 per month. So no matter where you start from or how you calculate it, it's a real 25% increase. It's not smoke and mirrors. It's a real hard 25% increase, no matter what you start with and where you go from. Whether you start with percentage of income, 4% to 5%, whether you start with annual income, $20,000 to $25,000, whether you start with monthly income, $1,667 to $2,083, it's a real 25% increase. We can actually do that. And we can even show them, when I go through the demonstration on the training call, we're actually showing people how I'm rounding up the $2,083 to $2,100 per month. Plus, if you've looked at the seminar, you'll see that we show people how they can actually increase that income over time, so that that 25% increase is actually more of a floor. It's not a ceiling. It's a place that we can actually bump you up 25%, and that might be the floor. That we might actually be able to build from there, and I'll talk about that more here in the next few minutes. But the sale plan makes that increase possible for a couple of reasons. The first reason that we can go from 4 to 5% is that we can spend assets 1 and 2 to 0 over a 10-year period of time, versus taking $500,000 over a 30-year period of time. We're able to take smaller amounts of money and spend them down quicker, which is why we can take more money. That's one reason why we can take more money. But another reason that we can take more money, which is closely tied to this, is something that's unique to insurance companies, which is why we use annuities, which is risk pooling. So here's where risk pooling, the idea of risk pooling, really comes into play when we're talking about retirement income. Suppose I have a pot of money, let's say $500,000, and I tell myself I need that to last my whole life. But now, what do I mean by my whole life? Because I don't really know for sure how long I'm going to live. I mean, I might live to be 70. I think I'm going to live longer than that. I hope I'm going to live longer than that, but it could be 70, but it could be 100. I mean, I have had relatives that have lived into their late 90s, so it's possible that I could live between 70 and 100 years old. But if I want to be safe, if I want to make sure that that money's not going to run out, I better go ahead and plan to live to how long? 100. Because that way, even if I live to be 100, I'll be okay. But if I'm going to plan and spend money as if I'm going to live to be 100, well, then I'm going to have to take less. Now, what if instead I take that money and I give it to an insurance company and they pool it with all the other dollars from all the other people who aren't sure how long they're going to live. They might live to be 70 or they might live to be 100. But now that we're all pooling our risk, we can spend money as if we're going to live to be 85. Some of us are going to die before 85, and that's going to fund the people who live past 85. So now we're able to take more money. That's why that 25% is so real. It's because we can spend assets to zero quicker, and we can spend as if we're going to live to 85 instead of 100 because we're pooling our risk. See, the sale plan gets us more money in retirement. And we spend a lot of time in the seminar talking about how it does it in a way that prevents sequence of return risk, which is the real big sell. But it helps us in another way. So I want to give a shout out to Wade Pfau and Michael Kitces as the leading voices and researchers on this topic. So they didn't work together. They've both been researching retirement income, and they both kind of came to the same conclusion. But here's the conclusion that they came to. They decided that, if you look across the landscape of all the people, all the prospects that you could run across, all those people, you could probably put them into one of four categories. There are going to be people in there who are die-hard principal preservation thinkers. They think that, you know what, you need to keep your money safe. You can only put it in CDs. You can only put it in money market accounts. You got to have your cash on hand. You got to make sure that your income in retirement is guaranteed, no risk whatsoever for loss. Now those people are kind of rare. There's also another segment of people that you would look at, and they're the growth people. They're the ones that say, hey, I'm going to have all my money in the market, and if I need money in retirement, I'm just going to sell some stuff. And that's how I'm going to fund my retirement, because I know the market goes more up than down, and over time, that's going to give me more growth. And yeah, I'm going to need income, but I'll just sell stuff as I need it. Well, they're kind of rare too. Really, most people are in the middle. They either tilt toward preservation or they tilt toward growth. And if you were to look at kind of a bell curve, in real life, I didn't get this bell curve from them. I just pulled this bell curve off the internet, but it's interesting that it kind of mimics real life. When they look at the numbers, they say, the number of people who tilt toward preservation, it's really 12 to 15%. That's the number of people that are hardcore principal preservation, 12 to 15%. They're on the back end there. And the number of people that are hardcore growth, that's another 12 to 15%. They're on the front end of this bell curve. Most people are going to either tilt toward preservation. That's going to be about 35 to 40% in the middle. They're kind of to the left of the middle. And then there are going to be those people that tilt toward growth. That's the other 35 to 40%. And so that's kind of how it works out. We end up with these four categories of people with different ideas of how to plan for income, but the vast majority of people are either going to tilt toward preservation or tilt toward growth. Okay, now the sale plan, time segmentation, that sings to people who tilt toward preservation, because they're thinking, hey, I want to have my basic needs guaranteed, but I still want to grow my money. This sale plan, that's perfect for me, because it guarantees the money I need in retirement, and it still has money on the back end to grow. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. So we're talking to the principal preservation people, and we're talking to the people who tilt toward growth when we present a sale plan. They're the ones that look at that and say, that's exactly what I'm looking for. When can we start? So that's 50% of the population. Now the growth people, they're tough. You're not going to have a very good chance from that. And a lot of times when I talk to guys, hey Jeff, just so you know, these people are super sophisticated. Probably what you mean by that is they have this all growth mindset. But now there's a lot of people, probably 35, 40%, who aren't principal preservation, who aren't growth, who aren't tilt toward preservation. They're tilt toward growth. What about them? Is there a way that this time segmentation would work for them? When they see a sale plan, what do they think? Well, what I would tell you is it's a great way to start a conversation with those people. But it's not going to be the be all and end all, because they're not going to like the fact that the sale requires them to take money out of the market and set it aside. And what they're really not going to like is the idea that the plan isn't flexible, that it's fixed, that once it's inside those assets, you've pretty much locked in your income and you've locked in your opportunity for growth. They just need more flexibility than that. So is there anything we can do for them? Well, it turns out that there is. We can do something for them. This article, Decision Rules and Maximum Initial Withdrawal Rates, was in the Journal of Financial Planning, and it's old. It was written in 2006, but it's still considered kind of the gold standard for talking about income flexibility and retirement. And what it basically did is it laid down some rules to say, well, if the markets perform like this, you can give yourself a raise. And if the markets perform like that, you're going to have to take a pay cut for a period of time. And here are the guardrails. Here are general rules of thumb for when you can give yourself a raise and when you're going to have to take a pay cut. Now, the great thing about the sale plan is we've eliminated the possibility of having to take a pay cut, which means if we do it right, we can still leave open the possibility of a pay increase in the future. So here's how we talk about it inside the seminar. These are the seminar slides. What I do is I tell people, hey, check this out. Here's our hypotheticals that we looked at earlier in the presentation, and we know that one of two things is going to happen. One of these two things is going to happen. Either we're going to end up experiencing an unfavorable sequence of return in retirement. You can see that scenario there on the left with portfolio A, and we saw that a sale plan is the only way to protect yourself from that happening. But we also said that it's possible that the sequence of returns could fall in your favor, which is that scenario on the right, portfolio B, and that you could end up with a lot more money than you started with. And ending up with a lot more money than you started with, I mean, that's great for your kids, but when I talk to most people who are retired or retiring, that's not necessarily their first priority. Most of the people I talk to want to make sure that they can enjoy their money while they're alive and while they're active. So what can we do about that? Can the sale do anything for us there? Well, it turns out that it can. Now, you don't want to do this willy-nilly, but in a situation where rates of return fall in a favorable sequence, you can build into your plan a rule that says, for instance, if my portfolio balance reaches 133% of my starting value, I'll ratchet up my withdrawals 1%. And in 5 years from that point, if my portfolio value is still 133% of my starting value, I'll ratchet up my withdrawals another 1%, and so on. The sale plan is flexible enough to incorporate pay raises in retirement when the sequence of return allows. And so now I can tell people that you can increase the income generated by your current investments by 25% just by using a formula developed at the University of San Francisco School of Business. And you can use those same strategies to give yourself 20% pay raises every 3 to 5 years without having to ever worry about taking a pay cut. So we talked about sale plans being the only withdrawal plan that will protect you from unfavorable sequences of return. But sale plans are flexible enough to allow us to bump up our income if the sequence of return allows us to. So the sale plan makes it easy to take withdrawals and monitor the ending balance of our investments and give ourselves a raise if the markets cooperate. Now that's exactly what people who tilt toward growth want to hear. They want to hear that there's flexibility, that just because I commit to taking 5% of my portfolio now, see, all they ever thought was I want to leave my options open. I want to stay in growth because, you know, the market may have a really good year and I don't want to lock myself into 4% or 5% withdrawals. I want to be able to take 6% if it's okay. I don't want to die with a big balance in my account. I want to be able to, If I can spend more, I want to be able to spend more. And the sale plan now sings to them and gives them a reason to do it. So the sale plan is really the only income solution that talks to everybody. And remember, your success doesn't hinge so much on what you talk about, the fact that you're talking about retirement income, as much as how and why you talk about it. The sale is a great tool and you can have a lot of success with it, but it works because of how you present it, not because of what it is. If all you do is show people a sale plan without really being good at the how and of articulating the how and why, guess what? It's toss a coin. Maybe they'll do it, maybe they won't. If you want them to do it, you're going to have to get good at articulating the how and why. You're going to need to understand the how and why, and then you're going to have to be able to articulate it. I mean, that's all that's going to, if all you do is just show the sale, just a basic sale plan and say, hey, you can see what I can see. You're basically splitting your money into 4 buckets. Most people are going to tell you, hey, that's interesting. Let me think about it. But only showing it as a tool to eliminate sequence of return risk and as a way to preserve the flexibility to get pay raises over time, if you can do that and do that well, you're going to start to close the cases that you didn't think that you could get. And that's true for talking about tax saving strategies in retirement. And that's true for talking about converting IRA money to Roths. You've got to be able to articulate the how and the why. The what is something everyone has seen and heard before. It's the how and the why that separates you from everybody else. So make sure you're good at the how and why of these things and how they work and the benefits that you can give people that they can't get anywhere else. They can get time segmentation from anybody else, but what they can't get is that 25% increase in income, or they can't get that flexibility to take pay raises in retirement. Now, the reality is they could get that if they did the time segmentation with another guy, but because he doesn't even know it and he's not explaining it, they're not going to do it. And that's why you can show the exact same thing, but because you're showing them how it eliminates the sequence of return risk, and delving into it and showing them how and delving into how and why they can get more money in retirement and get pay raises, they're going to do the exact same thing that they passed on with him with you because you're better at presenting it. So get good at presenting things. Okay, that's all I've got for today. We'll talk to you guys Monday. Mike will be back on Wednesday. And so if you have any questions between now and Wednesday, just give Jerry's in the office. I think Matt's, everybody in ECA is in the office. Everybody at 5Q is here except for Mike, and he'll be back on Wednesday. So hope you guys have a great week, and we will talk to you on Monday. Thanks, guys.